The beginning of life. The word communication means the ability to send information and have it received and understood by the person to whom it's being sent. And man is not the only animal who has the ability to do this. Animals have a variety of ways they communicate with one another, such as by colors or movements or sounds, and they use these to attract a mate, warn of danger, issue a call to action, or convey any other kinds of information. However, among all the many and varied species of animals on the earth, man is the only one who has the ability to communicate his ideas through the use of writing. The oldest form of a written language is known as cuneiform, but over time, other forms of writing were developed, such as Sanskrit, Egyptian, Hindu, Mayan, and others. Originally, these were used primarily to convey practical information, such as accounting for commercial transactions, names of government officials, or the recording of historical events. And these were written primarily on clay tablets or carved into stone. However, over time, man later discovered how to make other forms of writing material, including paper, and along with that, he learned how to develop more sophisticated forms of writing, which then led to the written languages as Greek, Roman, Arabic, Japanese, Korean, and many more. Because of this, man became more prolific in making written records that contained higher ideas than just the ordinary mundane things of life. And when he learned to put these papers together, he began to make volumes and volumes of books. But the most basic form of all writing is made by making various kinds of markings. For example, when we look at the American alphabet, we see what we call letters. But these letters are nothing more than different kinds of markings or drawings that we then give meaning to. Then, when we put these different markings together in a certain sequence, we call them words. And when we put those words in a specific order, we create what is known as a sentence. And this is the way that all written languages work. Therefore, whenever we see any form of writing that conveys information that can be understood by someone receiving it, we know it has to be the work of someone who has a high degree of communication skill that is superior to all other forms of life as we know it, except for humans. Our English alphabet has 32 letters that allows us to make an infinite number of words. But there's another written language that has 64 letters. But instead of them being written on clay or stone or paper, these are written on an extremely small ribbon made of sugar and phosphate, which forms the backbone of what is called deoxyribonucleic acid, or what is more commonly known as DNA. Attached to this backbone are 4 different nucleotides, named adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, but we normally refer to them by their first letters, A, T, G, and C. But it's the order in which these 4 nucleotides are arranged that spells a word, which then can be put together to make a sentence. And it's when these sentences are arranged together in a specific sequence that they then provide the instructions to every cell in both plants and animals of how they're to be assembled and what their function will be. But how do we get 64 letters from just 4 nucleotides? To answer that question, we first have to understand how this information is conveyed and understood by the cell. We can think of DNA as being shaped like a twisted ladder that has 2 long sides with rungs between them. If we were to split this ladder in half down the center, then we would have one side of the ladder that contains just half of each rung. This part of the ladder is known as ribonucleic acid, or RNA for short, and it is this part of the DNA that is read by the cell. The organelle that reads the RNA is called a ribosome, and the RNA goes into one side of it, which then reads 3 nucleotides at a time, and it's the combination of 3 nucleotides read together as one that makes a letter. For example, GCA would be one letter, while AAG would be a different letter, as would CAC. And it's in this way that there can be 64 different combinations. Each letter corresponds to a specific amino acid, and amino acids are what proteins are made of. But it's how these amino acids are put together that determines what kind of protein will be made. As the ribosome reads the nucleotides on the RNA, it collects the appropriate amino acid for that letter and attaches it to the previous amino acid. And it keeps doing this until the instructions tell it to stop. There are 3 billion nucleotides in the human body, which make up over 60,000 genes, and 20,000 of them contain the code needed to make proteins, with each one performing a particular function. If just one amino acid is not attached in the right order, then either the protein doesn't work, or it becomes a different kind of protein than what it was supposed to be. In that case, the body is missing an important protein it needs to properly function. Therefore, the sequence of the nucleotides, as found on the RNA, have to be very precise as to exactly which amino acid is to be placed in what order. To illustrate this, take the word sun, S-U-N. If we change just one letter, we could spell sun, S-O-N, or fun, or sin, or pun, sub, run, or bun. All of these words have very different meanings, and misspelling even one word could completely change the meaning of the instructions. And if the combination of letters doesn't even make a word, then the instructions become almost impossible to follow. But what if you had a word that had many letters in it? If just one letter was wrong, it would make that word become unintelligible. Proteins are what make our muscles, bones, skin, hair, arteries, veins, blood, eyes, organs, teeth, nerves, and everything else in our body. There are proteins that digest our food, determine our moods, and produce and regulate our hormones. In the human body, there are over 100,000 different kinds of proteins, and the instructions of how to make each and every one of them and what function they'll perform is all written in our DNA, not with ink on paper, but with nucleotides on a sugar and phosphate base. And this written code is more complex than anything man has ever created. Evolutionists tell us that all life on Earth has evolved from a lower form to a higher form of life, as a result, in one way or another, from changes to the instructions found on the DNA. But how do those changes come about? According to what science tells us, over millions of years, there have been a series of small, random, accidental changes to the code in our DNA. In other words, what evolutionists want us to believe is that this complex written code and the ability of a cell to read, understand, and carry out these instructions found in that code came about strictly by chance. To put this in perspective, suppose we wanted to add a simple carport to our already existing home. If we were to give written instructions of how this carport was to be built, could we take the building instructions we already have for our home and randomly change a word here or there, or accidentally rearrange one sentence in those instructions that would then give us the perfect description of how to build and add the kind of carport we want? To build even a simple added structure to our house would take a very complex blueprint, giving precise dimensions, angles, different kinds of material needed, as well as assembly instructions. That kind of information doesn't happen by chance, even if we waited 1,000,000 years. To better understand the impossibility of this, evolutionists tell us that all life began as a single-cell organism, and today we know that a single-cell bacteria has one chromosome that contains around 1,500 to 7,500 very simple genes. The explanation of how the human body evolved from that to our DNA having 23 pairs of chromosomes containing 60,000 very complex genes means that over millions of years, more and more codes of instruction would have had to have been added to what already existed. To say that all of those extra precise instructions came about because of random, accidental changes is completely contrary to everything we know about the development of language. Any written language is the result of a deliberate, conscious effort on the part of someone who possesses a high degree of intelligence. But it takes even more intelligence to design and build a machine that can read, interpret, and carry out the instructions of that writing. For example, computers. They have the ability to perform a multitude of amazing tasks, but it first took someone with a high degree of intelligence to create a computer language. And then it took a different kind of intelligence to build a machine that could read that language. The fact that the DNA of every living organism contains a highly sophisticated written language is evidence that it couldn't have come into existence simply through the natural laws of physics, nor that every living cell, with its amazing ability to understand that language and to act on it, cannot be an accident of nature. Why? Because it's too deliberate, too precise, and too well written. And it has always been that way from the very beginning of life.